I'd like to call the Kankakee County Board meeting for March 9th, 2021 to order. Today's invocation is from Roger Hess, County Board Member.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for our freedom, our opportunity, and our privileges. We beg of you to bless, assist, and enlighten the elected officials and concerned citizens gathered here today. May we prove worthy of the confidence placed in us by our fellow citizens. May we be just and upright in our thinking, honest in all of our actions, and ever be guided by the true conscience in the legislation we propose or vote upon. Forgive us our mistakes and our selfish tendencies, and help prepare us for the good deeds for an eternal union with you. Father, we also ask that you watch over and protect all of our first responders, healthcare workers, and the people serving in the military at home and abroad. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty, could we get a roll call, please? Thank you.
Mr. Hess.
Present.
Mr. Tholen. Mrs. Polk.
Present.
Mr. Snipes.
Present.
Mr. Seroy.
Present.
Mr. Lear.
Present.
Mrs. Weber.
Present.
Mrs. Peters.
Present.
Mr. Payton.
Present.
Mrs. Parker.
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Present.
Mr. Fairfield.
Present.
Mr. Carrico.
Present.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Present.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Swanson.
Present.
Mr. Featherling.
Present.
Mr. Dunhill.
Present.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Long.
Present.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Present.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan. Ms. Bryan? Okay. Mr. Collins.
Present.
Ms. Hudson.
Present.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Present.
Mr. Alexander Hildebrand.
Present.
Mr. Wheeler.
Present.
We have quorum.
We have quorum. I have no public commentary today. Under proclamations, we have really two things. The first thing is declaring the month of May as Building Safety Month in Kankakee County. Would anybody like the full resolution read? Alrighty, can I have a motion to approve? Mr. Smith, Ms. Polk, Mr. Darrell Smith, Ms. Polk with a second. Let's just do a full roll call, please. In a mixed bag here, about half and half.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Oh, if you get. Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. This last one we already voted on last month, but the recipients could not be here. It's a presentation to the Eastside Bulldogs Youth Football Program. If we've already got it in the record, but it bears that we read it again, and they asked our county clerk if they could read that again.
Absolutely. Okay. Proclamation of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, in recognition of the Kankakee Eastside Bulldogs, a youth football program that advanced and won the national championship in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Whereas the Kankakee Eastside Bulldogs is a youth football program that advanced to the national championship in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. They won the 14U Division Thanksgiving Bowl championship game on November 28, 2020. And whereas the Kankakee County Board congratulates the Kankakee Eastside Bulldogs, a youth football program, as for advancing to the national championship on November 28, 2020, and for title and winning. And whereas the Eastside Bulldogs for the past 55 years have provided the community with youth sports. Despite living through a global pandemic, they have opted to continue to provide the youth with recreational sports during the fall. And whereas the Eastside Bulldogs did not waste a single opportunity, as they went on to finish 14-2-1 overall, winning 2 of the 4 championship tournaments along the way, including an additional second-place finish. Whereas the Eastside Bulldogs, through all the obstacles with health, safety, and following guidelines, had a successful season. Coach David Hetherington said he believes this year's season was a success thanks to the aid of Jess C. Gathing Jr., Kankakee Eastside Bulldogs Football League president. In the end, I think it turned out well, Hetherington said. The kids enjoyed themselves, and we were able to add a few more kids. Whereas the Kankakee County Board recognizes the outstanding achievement, excellence, tradition, and leadership, and congratulates the entire team on their amazing season. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Kankakee County Board that it recognizes the Eastside Bulldogs for their outstanding athletic achievement in bringing recognition to the Kankakee County community with pride, sportsmanship, and dignity. And we congratulate them on their championship win after advancing to the national championship in Gatlinburg, Tennessee on November 28th, 2020.
Congratulations. And Mr. Did you get up to speak? Congratulations to everybody involved, to the players, the coaches, the family members, everybody. Mr. Hunter asked us to bring this forward. I thought it was appropriate that Steve might be the one to present this, and if he has any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Many of you participated in donating funds and support for the Eastside Junior Football program in their trip. As you well know, that costs a lot of money, and it still continues to provide services for in excess of 300 kids in the community. As the clerk read, it is a Kankakee County program, so it impacts all the people who are here on the county board. Additionally, I'd like to convey to those of you who donated, and I'll just read some of the names, but there are a lot more who provided monetary and other kinds of support, like Wendy's provided food, for the kids on their voyage to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Let me just mention a few names here. Coach Reggie Jones is here representing as one of the coaches. Jesse Gathing, who is the president of the Eastside Junior Football Program. Theodis Pace is the athletic director. These gentlemen have in excess of 100 years of youth volunteerism. They take time out of their busy schedules to interface not only with the boys, but also there's cheerleading as well too, and they take them everywhere. They've been to Florida, they've been to Minnesota, they've been to Detroit at some of the professional football games as well too. They provide counseling, etc. This last fall, I remember with the program that State's Attorney Rowe had film out at the Theodis Pace Field. There's a multiplicity of activities that they provide for our kids. It's not just about football and cheerleading. There's a multiplicity of other things that they provide to our youth. They are assets to our community, and many of you have provided monetary support and other kind of support towards that program. I'd like to thank Chairman Wheeler, Vice Chairman Seroy, as well as some of the board members who provided funds as well too. Board Member Lear, Patricia Polk, Sheriff Downey, who always provides support for our youth, not only here in the city of Kankakee, but throughout the county. State Representative Jackie Haas, Senator Patrick Joyce, Also Treasurer Nick Africano and the Republican County Committee, as well as the Democrats as well too. They teamed up in supporting this particular program. Additionally, the coroner provided assistance as well too. State's Attorney Rowe, always there for us. Jerry Sudduth with the Democratic Central Committee. So it's a bipartisan kind of thing. So I think the Democrats and Republicans can take solace in supporting this program. Maybe the Libertarians will jump on board as well too. Additionally, Dan Hendrickson, our county clerk, supported us as well too. Lori Gadboys is always there for us as well too. Let's see, Dan, I got Pat Polk. Did I leave anybody out? Who gave us? Sam Payton gave support as well too. So I'd like to take this opportunity to present this particular plaque to the officials of Eastside Junior Football. All right. Okay, President, any words?
We want to thank the county board and Stevie Hunter who helped us a lot. And as Stevie said, some of us have been at this for quite a while. I got 37, 38 years, and who's counting, right? But during the pandemic, we had to make a decision, and we had to go to Indiana to play football. And when we got to Indiana to play football, we realized that when our Super Bowls were over with for all those years, we ran to put the equipment into the shed because the season was over with. And last year we found that after the season was much more greater because we won a championship in Crown Point, Indiana. The monster of the Midway, and we said we should have been doing this all along. And after that, we made it down to Gatlinburg, not knowing what we were going to be facing. But we had an idea because of the media, and it was just great. It was great for the coaches. It was great for the kids. We all had to mask up all the time, and I don't know how many times I've been tested for COVID and never got it. But the oldest got 46 years of coaching at Eastside. Reggie's been with us 10 or 15 years. And we're just thankful for the whole community that supported us on the season last year. And we made it down and we won a national championship. The oldest.
All right. Well, I'm gonna be real brief. It's just that I just want to thank the community. Eastside, July 1965, and here we still are. We have sign-ups coming up on this coming Saturday for our 21st season. 2021 season. We changing leagues. But Stevie mentioned, and I'll be totally remiss, that of the 40 plus years that I've coached football, I was just talking with John Coughlin, the former District 111 board member. It's more than about football, and everybody want to know me. It's about discipline. Our team represent our community well academically. We deal with scholarships. We just deal with the whole person. And again, I want to take this opportunity to thank the county board for recognizing us. And in this time with the pandemic and what's going on across the world and this nation, it is always good to hear something positive about our youth. Again, I enjoy every moment that I've coached, mentored every young man, every young lady with Kankakee Eastside Junior Football League. Again, I just want to say thank you.
All right. Thank you. All righty. Let's wait till our first responders are done letting us know they're coming through. While we're waiting, I skipped over the certificates of appreciation. I don't think anybody's here today, but I do want to mention There's some pretty significant milestones. 35 years at the Public Defender's Office, John Skimmerhorn. 30 years in Corrections, Trent Johnson. And 30 years at the Highway Department, Dale Moore. This is our group of 20-year employees. Adam Brakeman in Corrections, Sabrina Flowers in Corrections, Steve McCarty in the Finance Department, and Carol Costello in the State's Attorney's Office. 15 years, Kevin Boykin, Highway Department, Darren Rosenthal, Highway Department, and Bob Beasley in the Maintenance Department. So thank you all for your continued service to the county and dedication. We have the finest certificates that paper will print coming your direction, so spare no expense here at the county. I will say that you know, we joke about that, but we really couldn't do anything here without the employees we have at the county. They've made tough times better, and we just want them to know we stick by them. Presentations, we went through that. Minutes of the last meeting. Is there a motion to approve February 9th, 2021?
Polk.
Ms. Polk, a second. Second, Mr. Snipes. Let's do roll call on Zoom. We'll try this. See if we can't get through the roll calls a little quicker.
Mrs. Polk,
Aye.
Mrs. Peters,
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield,
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff,
Aye.
Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Featherling,
Aye.
Mr. Donnell,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Long,
Aye.
Ms. Bryan,
Aye.
Mr. Collins,
Aye.
Ms. Hudson,
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
That's it.
For those in the room, if motion, aye if you approve. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to Claims Committee reports.
Your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report they have examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants. Total claims, $6,475,132.30.
Do we have a motion? Mr. Lear? Second to Ms. Polk, I believe I heard on Zoom.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hodder.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under department reports.
County Collector's Monthly Report for January 2021. Total cash and bank and investments, $656,209.12. County Treasurer's Monthly Report for January 2021. Total cash and investments, $656,209.12. Coroner's Monthly Report for January 2021. Total calls, 122, 12 coroner's cases, 5 autopsies, 5 toxicology, 1 donation, 1 indigent, 1 fetal, 71 hospice, 37 referral, 81 cremations, 3 pending. Coroner's Income Summary Report for January 2021, $5,837.13. Circuit Clerk Cash Book for January 2021 month end. Disbursed total $283,906.55. Recorder's Monthly Report for January 2021. Disbursement fees paid to the County Treasurer of $167,164.34. County Clerk's Monthly Report for January 2021. Total disbursements, $57,245.11. Animal Control Monthly Report for January 2021. Total fees, $24,928.15. Total animals handled, 58. Monthly Building Division Report for January 2021. Total permits, 24. Total fees of $9,741. Monthly Resolution Report for March 2021. Total to the county, $10,061.14. And the Regional Superintendent's quarterly report is on file.
Is there a motion to combine and approve, Mr. Payton? With the
Hudson.
motion, Ms. Hudson with the second. Any questions, comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
At 10 o'clock.
Mr.
or 4
Kinzinger.
o'clock.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under consent agenda, is there anything that needs to be removed and considered separately? Second time, anything that anybody would like removed to consider on its own? Do we have a motion to combine and approve?
Miller.
Ms. Parker and Mr. Miller with the second. If we can get those read in the record, even better.
The appointment of Christine A. Allen to the Limestone Township Fire Protection District. The reappointment of Mark Rogers to the Kankakee County Geographic Information System Committee. The reappointment of Lori Gadboy to the Kankakee County Geographic Information System Committee. The reappointment of Eric Blair to the Kankakee County Geographic Information Systems Committee. The reappointment of Timothy Nugent to the Kankakee County Geographic Information System Committee. The appointment of Thomas Peterson to the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission. The appointment of Jane Schwartz to the Kankakee County Historic Preservation Commission.
All righty. I need a roll call whenever you get a chance.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Next item, basically, the concurring resolution is paying the bills for the highway department. Is there a motion on that? Mr. Hess, second. Mr. Payton. Any questions about any of those? Otherwise, we'll have to go through roll call. Roll call vote.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long,
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra,
Aye.
Mr. Hunter, Ms. Bryan,
Aye.
Mr. Collins,
Aye.
Ms. Hudson,
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais,
Aye.
Mr. Alexander,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. If we can get the title of the next one, just run in.
Border Bridge Agreement between Kankakee County, Illinois and Lake County, Indiana.
Let's start with a motion on this one first.
Peters.
Ms. Peters with a motion, second. Mr. Snipes. Is there any explanation needed on this? Mark Rogers is on, if anybody needs a brief explanation. Why don't you go ahead anyway, Mark, and just let him refresh.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the result of the Federal Highway Administration stating that there be bridge agreements on the border of the state of Illinois with Indiana and the surrounding states. So we have currently 3 bridges that border Indiana. And so Lake County and the County of Kankakee share maintenance and jurisdiction of the bridge over the Kankakee River, the bridge over the Williams Ditch, and the Singleton Ditch. So this border agreement makes it so that we decided who was going to get jurisdiction and maintenance of which bridge, so that during inspections, which have to be done on a biannual basis, which state is going to be doing those inspections, because currently we're both doing the inspections, we're both submitting everything to the feds regarding this. So what we did was Lake County has jurisdiction of the roadway of the Williams Ditch, and Momence Township in Kankakee County has jurisdiction by the Singleton Ditch. So Kankakee County is going to take jurisdiction of the Singleton Ditch. The Lake County is going to take jurisdiction of the Williams Ditch. But we did not include the river bridge because there is still some things going on with that, trying to get that issue resolved. So this involves just those 2 bridges at this time.
Is there any follow-up there? I can tell you that we've got a really good working relationship with Lake County, Indiana. They have commissioners over there where we have county board members. They're a commission style. They have 3 of them. One of them, his name's Jerry Tippy, who's over that area, and they've been nothing but accommodating, gracious. They want to help us take care of the state line bridge issue. So this is just a continuation of that cooperation.
Yes.
There's a lot you can get done when you work together. So with no questions, probably should be a roll call vote for everybody, I would say. Yeah, it has to be.
Yes, thank you.
Please and thank you.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker. Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on, the next item, if we could get the title read in the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, authorizing the County Board Chairman to sign a contract with Alternative Vending Concepts Incorporated for vending machine services.
Let's start with a motion first on this one. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Carrico, a second? Mr. Seroy. There is a disclosure on this, and we want to remind the board that Wes Andrews is the principal owner of this vending machine company. Had the contract before he worked here, went through the bidding process. We did, not obviously Wes. He didn't accept the bids or open the bids. It was open bid. So we just want to make sure we have to do the disclosures and it doesn't cross the threshold where he cannot have this business. It just has to be bid and done by other people and the disclosures made. So is there anything you would like to add, Mr. Rowe, on that?
There was a Scrivener's error in the original resolution. It's been corrected to reflect that the principal owner of the company is Wesley Andrews, not Walt Andrews. Walt Andrews is the sales and marketing individual, according to a letter that they had sent. The state statute requires that when a county contracts with someone who has that close relationship with the county, that the relationship needs to be disclosed to the county board with contracts that total over $30,000. Now, a vending machine contract is really fluid, right? 1 year it could be a booming business maybe, and the next year not so much if buildings are closed. So when we look historically over the past, what has this contract generated as far as revenue, it looks like it's about the county's commission, which is 20%, is about $280. Total receipts for the 5 machines under this contract, gross receipts were about or adjusted gross receipts were about $1,300 a year, well below the $30,000 threshold. But because of that close relationship, we wanted to be transparent and make sure we disclose it to everyone so you're well aware of what you're voting on.
Any questions on that?
And I don't know, Andy or Chairman Wheeler, if you mentioned this, but it was put out to bid, and I believe this was the only bid that, or only proposal that was received. Is that correct?
Yes, you're correct. Yep. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? Otherwise, let's do, we got a roll call for everybody, I guess.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico. Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. I just for clarity's sake, that $230 or $80 was a year, not a month.
Per year, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't, it's, believe me, I think owning a vending machine in a courthouse during COVID is probably not that good of a business because there's not a lot of people there, but I just thought I'd mention that. Moving on, under PZA, could we get that title read in the record, please?
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, awarding the bid to the lowest responsible bidder, A&R Tree and Demo, to demo structures at 203 South Laurel Lane, Kankakee, Illinois.
All righty. Is there a motion on this one to start with?
Mr. Chairman, I make that motion.
Mr. Featherling, a second?
Yes.
I second.
I think is Miss Bryan was a second. Is that correct? Okay, I think I got that.
Yes.
All right. Any questions for Dell on this one? He's on. Mr. Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed there were 3 bids that were lower than the lowest responsible bidder. Is it appropriate to ask what the circumstances were there?
Yeah, I think that should be stated on the record, why this bidder was found to be the lowest responsible bidder as opposed to the 3 lower bids.
All righty, I'm unmuted. Okay, yes, there were actually 3 bidders that had a lower total bid value than the lowest responsible bidder, but the other 3 did not meet the requirements of the bid and offered no proof of insurance, timelines for the project, no information about prevailing wage, no contractors list, no qualifications or references, which were all part of the bid packet as required submittals.
That's it. And people were asking about lowest responsible bidder. That's exactly why that language exists. Yeah, it was a non-conforming submission. It's a good way to put it. Do you know someone in that industry? Okay, I thought you might know a guy. Is any other questions for Dell about that? It's pretty straightforward. This is part of the FEMA program, I believe, to demolish these houses because they're mostly uninhabitable. And once this is done, we'll move on to the next two, correct, Dell? Next two. All righty. I guess we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico. Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. What's the title on the next one? Is it just Kankakee County zoning map amendments? Is that what that is?
2021.
Oh, could you please read the title into the record?
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding Kankakee County zoning map amendments 2021.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
Eckhoff.
We'll go with Mr. Eckhoff, second with Mr. Payton. It's pretty straightforward. Went through it in PZA. Mr. Kinzinger, almost called you Mr. Featherling, sorry.
My packet indicates the resolution, but I do not have a copy of that zoning change. Were there any changes, or are the zonings in the county staying as previously presented, just updated?
A complete answer from Dell on that one. I could give a partial one, please. Yeah.
Each year, we ask the county board to readopt our map reflecting all zoning cases from the previous year. So all changes on the map occurred at PZA and county board level last year. With the exception of this year, we added 48 annexation agreements from Hopkins Park, which the county board had no vote on, but just to be able to track those properties, we've included them on our zoning map.
Okay. Somewhat associated with this, but really tangential, is the update to our comprehensive plan. We talked about this. It's an exercise that the county should go through on a regular basis. We haven't done one in, what, 20 years, 25?
2005 was the last one.
2005, okay. Do you update the zoning in the rural areas at that point? Like, I know we ran into some cases where some things that we thought were gonna be residential 50 years ago are now not residential. They're basically, we know they're gonna be ag. I think about Moments out in that area. Do we update what we think that's gonna be at that point, or?
No, they're two different types of documents. The zoning map is actually a legal document, whereas the comprehensive plan is just that, a plan. The plan, however, can be used as a justification to change the zoning map. And in 2005, they actually recommended that a couple of areas of the county that have an absorbent amount of residential zoning be reduced.
Okay.
But we would have to take actual action to do that at the zoning board, county board level.
So it's really go through the strategic planning process in the document and then take action from that, correct?
Yes, you can. You certainly can. You can certainly use the comprehensive plan for that purpose, and should.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure we were lining that up correct. Mr. Kinzinger.
Yeah, Dell said something that I missed. He said something that, was it in Pembroke that you annexed, or did something that the board knew nothing about?
I think Hopkins Park did.
Hopkins Park.
Yeah,
Hopkins Park, yes. Those are not zoning cases, but because Hopkins Park has entered into annexation agreements with 48 property owners, and the state statute allows them to basically take control of those properties. The state statute states that these properties, even though they're not in the municipality, are subject to all laws, ordinances, and rules as if they were in the municipality. We've added them, we basically gray them out on our zoning map so that my staff is not trying to enforce zoning rules on them because it is now subject to the village's zoning rules.
Are they within a mile and a half? Is that the statutory thing?
Well, within a mile and a half, the village can do it and does not have to ask anybody's permission. Outside the mile and a half, the county board, they have to bring it before the county board to get their permission.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Snipes.
Just a point of clarification. If they annex that 1.5 mile in, does that give them the right to now go 1.5 miles out later once that's annexed in, or do they still have to come to the county?
If it were to be annexed in, these are only annexation agreements that, as an agreement with the property owner, that if the property becomes contiguous with the village, it would be annexed. So if that were to occur and they were to be annexed, the mile and a half would reach out even farther.
Makes sense.
But these annexation agreements do not push out the mile and a half.
All right. Is there any other questions on this? We kind of broadened the discussion, but it is relevant for future action, so. I'm not sure we need a roll call for this.
On Zoom. We're not spending any money.
Yeah, we do a roll call on Zoom and then we'll do a voice vote in the room.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith and Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Those in the room, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Del, would you see a reason why these next two there couldn't be a motion to combine and approve for decommissioning?
No, they certainly could be. They're the same company. They're side-by-side solar farms on the same piece of
Substantially the
property.
same agreement. Okay, is there a
They
motion
are,
to combine in the
other than
next?
the numbers, they are the same agreement.
Motion to combine and approve the next two, Mr. Hess, second?
Hudson.
Mr. Kirkstra? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, sorry about that. We'll get you next time.
Who's second?
Sorry.
Second is Mr. Kirkstra. If we can get those two titles, please.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, agreement to approve decommissioning plan and bond in the amount of $206,349 for the Gar Creek Solar West Farm project. An agreement to approve decommissioning plan and bond in the amount of $194,593 for the Gar Creek Solar East Farm project.
Alrighty, is there any questions from the board on this? We have new board members, sometimes they may have questions. Just up front, these decommissioning plans, in order for us to have any leverage at all, if the company goes belly up, as they say, they have to have money bonded, readily available for the removal of these projects. So it's our protection, it's our insurance policy, if you will. So, any other questions? Let's do a full roll call on those, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico. Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Swanson. Mr. Swanson. Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Looking at the next three, they're really part of the same package, if you will, for Showbud. Bud is what it says on Showbud. It's not a dispensary. So yeah, it's. I think we can combine those as well. I don't see any substantial difference. We can explain them all. Is there a motion to combine and approve, Mr. Hunter? Second? Ms. Polk with a second. Ben, do you just want to run through the details real quick, maybe?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So this is.
You're kind of low there, Ben. I don't know what's the level.
Maybe I'll just be really loud. Is that better?
No, actually not.
You want me to run up?
Yeah, it might be a good idea, because the board needs to hear what this agreement is. Sorry about that.
Want me to read them into the record?
Yeah, he can read them in the record, please, and thank you.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, regarding resolution authorizing execution and amendment of section 5311 grant agreement, fiscal year 2022. Resolution authorizing execution and amendment of Downstate Operating Assistance Grant Agreement, fiscal year 2022. Purchase of service agreement with Showbus to operate the county's rural general public transportation service, state fiscal year 2022.
It's like you had theme music, Ben, so yeah.
Too many cheeseburgers, I guess. So the three of these are, every year we have to re-up our 5311 and our downstate operating assistance. So as part of that, we have a vendor. Showbus provides our rural transit. Can I have like one?
Yeah. I think he ran down the stairs. I think he pulled a hamstring or something. I don't know what just happened.
More on the weekends, I guess. So they provide our transit for us. And part of this, every year we execute this. So it's 3 separate agreements. We have one state, one federal, and then the transit provider. So you put all 3 of them together, then we submit the application to the state.
Yep. It's all one package for our rural transit system. We own the buses and then we lease them. So, Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Chairman. Ben, would you explain what 5311 means to the new members?
So this is Federal Transit Administration Section 5311 rural transit dollars. These are the dollars utilized to do rural transit operations outside of metro areas.
Yeah. And they can't operate point to point within the cities. That's Metro, River Valley Metro. But they can do commuters, and that's the bus service that we provide that goes between there's a lot of rural service, a lot in the Hopkins Park, Pembroke area, Pembroke Township, but also there's really a jobs bus that goes from Kankakee out to Moments every day, 4 a.m. That's, I think, our heaviest route, is it not?
Yeah, they're probably 70% of our riders are commuters. So it's on the hour, it's hour and 15-minute service running from Kankakee at the transfer station here on Chestnut, through Sun River Terrace to Moments, and then returning.
Right. If we did not have that, a lot of those folks couldn't get to the jobs that are available in Moments. Yes, sir. Mr. Kinzinger.
Quick question. Do these agreements, let's say that one of the parties default for any reason, do they have out clauses?
60 day?
Well, so I mean, there's under the IDOT agreement, essentially we're as a body saying we'll provide this transit. So then we make a requisition to them if we've offered the transit. So if at any point we didn't offer transit, we could request IDOT to not have an agreement with IDOT for the DOAP or 5311. But yeah, there is an opt-out with our service provider.
Is it 60 or 90?
I think it's 60.
That was 60, yeah. I know the opt-out and it's mutual, so. Any thoughts, questions? We have a motion. Mr. Hunter, did you have something?
What are the most problems you have with the system? Any identifiable issues?
As far as operating a rural transit system is concerned, it's just the overall cost. So the commuter route's nice in that a regular group of people ride, these are employees riding from Kankakee to Moments, but we have a lot of deadhead miles on, a pickup. You drive 15 miles out with nobody on the bus. You pick up one person and you take them into town. It's an essential service and we need it. It's just very expensive to operate. So our probably biggest hurdle is finding that match. The federal grant and state grant come through for a large component, but the county puts in 15,000. We have some local service providers that give us some of our match, but it's always hard to maximize the dollars. You'll see the numbers came through, I think it's like 166,000 and 5311 and about 1.4 million in dope. We're unable to maximize that because we can't pay 100% of certain costs for transportation. So the biggest hurdle in rural transit is trying to find enough match dollars to maximize our grant. If we had more match, we'd have more buses hauling more routes. But at the end of the day, it's people. Now, I will say under COVID, one of our issues is in order to appropriately distance, we're double hauling routes. So where one bus goes to an area previously, we're now sending 2 buses. So it just adds to that cost. But it's something we must do to make sure our riders are safe, our drivers are safe. And it's just what we're incurring through COVID. So that's kind of just the overall expense of it. And then how do you manage it through COVID? I would say probably our 2 hurdles right now.
Any other thoughts, questions? All right, thanks, Ben. We'll do a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico. Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. All right. Thank you.
I think it's combined and approved.
Is there anything else, Ben? You good? Well, we just voted on all 3. Oh, the land bank? Okay, yes, there's a mistake for that. All right, the next item, if we can get the title read in the record.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, authorizing the County Board Chairman to sign an intergovernmental agreement to establish the Kankakee Regional Land Bank Authority in the County of Kankakee.
Is there a motion on this to start with?
Eckhoff.
Mr. Eckhoff, a second. Ms. Parker? Discussion, I guess. We've talked about this for a few months. I want to make sure that everybody knows what we're doing and why we're doing and all of that kind of stuff. So, oh geez, it feels like this started maybe, for me, about 10 years ago with the city of Kankakee mentioning it to the previous mayor. Wasn't very interested at the time, and there was a couple of aldermen at the time that were interested. It came back under the current mayor. She had reached out to us to see if we wanted to participate in a land bank, and there's a lot of benefit to this. To having a regional land bank takes in those properties that are wherever they're located within the rural area as it stands right now, or the city of Kankakee. The county would get the home rule powers to, I want to say, quick take, if you will. Take those properties. We are the trustee, so then we could wipe away all the back taxes and the liens and get those vacant properties that either all the copper's gone or the windows are all broken, or it could be a commercial business that's sitting there that somebody wants to develop, but there's millions in taxes and liens on it. It's a way to wipe all that clean without going through the courts for 2 years, which most people doing deals don't want to wait that long. So it's a really, really nice tool for residential and commercial change within a community in the county. So beyond that, I guess, Ben, you talk nuts and bolts, or he's here for questions, but we finally got to the point where we've agreed on everything and we approve it here. I could tell you this, that I've spoken with the mayor of Mantino. He reached out, Bourbonnais reached out, very interested in becoming part of this. I'd spoken with the mayor of Hopkins Park. They're very interested in becoming part of this. So the communities are lining up. And I think we're gonna have a truly regional land bank that benefits anybody in the county that wants to be part of this in terms of the municipal governments. heard from some of the smaller communities, they don't have much blight, but they do see the need to be part of it and part of the process, because at some point they may have a business that is just sitting there and they can't do anything with it, and this might be a tool to help them get it back on the tax roll. So am I pretty accurate there, Ben, or way off?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I guess this is about, thank you, Andy. This is about properties that don't generate taxes and don't contribute and become a drain. And in the presentation we did at PZA, it's about stabilization and raising housing values. So you can't overcome 8 years of back taxes as a developer. And the development community will just say, you know, we can go in so many other places. It's a big county, we can develop somewhere else. And so we're allowed to use targeted efforts on properties that we need to get back on the tax rolls. There are prime properties in commercial corridors that have entitlement issues. There are prime properties in residential areas that could be turned over. And this tool is just another kind of arrow in the quiver for us to work on, probably more at the Alliance side of enticing people to develop in Kankakee County.
There is an added benefit for the county. We're the ones who have to keep paying for those sale and errors, for those little 2-foot by 10-foot properties that people buy and make interest off of us. Those can go to the land bank, so they're not in the
retention ponds and things that happen.
Things that and board members may not know this, and some do, that, you know, there are business models out there that buy these slivers of properties in mass, and then they make the interest on them from us, and we got to pay them back. So in essence, we're an investment opportunity because we got these properties that don't even have houses on them. They're like almost easements in a way. So it's a good way for us to kind of push those off to the side as well as a county. And they just sit there. Mr. Snipes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How does this differ from the county tax sale, other than just the timetable in which we can put things back into production?
So it's not, this tool is not just a tax transfer, tax wipe tool. They can hold property, maintain property, they can assemble property. You know, through the tax sale, the trustee receives certain properties. The land bank can actually then acquire several properties in a row. I mean, maybe there's a purchase in the middle of it. It doesn't have to necessarily be only through this. So local units of government really struggle on assembling properties. If I asked this board for, you know, $300,000 to assemble some property to make something happen, it would be very difficult for you to stomach buying that property. This is something the land bank as a tool can work on that. So maybe a couple of them are tax delinquent, a couple of them aren't, and they can negotiate that deal and then turn it over. I worked with the South Suburban Land Bank previously, and the tool is not, I mean, the tax wipes are very nice. That lowered basis is very important, but it's not just that as far as the tool is concerned.
Mr. Hunter?
I know we had some concerns about the name and also the membership in terms of board of directors regarding residency of Kankakee County. Has that been clarified and resolved, or what?
Yes, the name is the Kankakee Regional Land Bank Authority, because it is a regional land bank. I thought that was a very good compromise, and then there was a little bit of pushback on, we didn't want any 1099 employees, but that was resolved and we have a full agreement. So
To clarify the 1099 stuff, because I know Ron and I had a discussion, and I think
Sure. The board in executive, I believe, had a debate whether you could have a contractor of a municipality represent you on that board as part of the original agreement. And we felt, as a board, we voted, and I believe it was unanimous, but at the time, that to have somebody who doesn't either live in this county or work in this county potentially making decisions at what could become a bonding authority down the road, we thought was not a very good thing for the taxpayers here. You want some local connection. It can't be somebody who just works for the county. We can't have one of our contractors sit on here. Now, they can be advisors to us, and we encourage that if they have a particular ability and experience in that, but not to be a voting member where at some point there could be tax dollars decided, if that makes sense. And I think that there was finally buy-in from the city on that side of it too. So it's really, you have to be accountable to local taxpayers, the people you either work with or you live with, if in fact you're really dealing with these properties. I didn't think that was a stretch, and I thought it was a good thing to have a discussion in executive about. Any other questions? For Ben? Zoom? Anything? All right, well, let's do a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico. Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell. Mr. Donnell. Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long. Mr. Long. Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. I personally want to thank Ben Wilson for his help in this. Barbie Brewer Watson was our associate working with the city. It seemed like we got a lot done when we put our shoulder to it. So thanks for all your help. It really was nice having someone who actually knew what they were talking about advising me. No, I'm just kidding. It's going to work out very well for the community. I would love to see when this thing hits the ground running and we start taking some of these properties that are just sitting there and we get developers interested in flipping them. It's going to be good for communities on a local block-to-block level. So under finance, or actually, I'm sorry, did I miss something?
Nope.
Nope. All right, so under finance, we can get the title of this right into the record.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, regarding general fund, interfund borrowing accounts as of November 30th, 2020.
Is there a motion on this to start with? Mr. Lear, second.
Second, Heather Bryan.
Second for Ms. Bryan. Steve, do you have any comments here? Any numbers? Any thoughts?
Other than this could be the last time the board has to deal with this, with what's pending at the federal level.
Yeah, it's the interfund transfers are something that obviously they're interfund. We're not really borrowing money. We're transferring between accounts. There's no banks involved. There's no interest rate involved. So I just want to make sure the board understood that it sounds like it's semantics, but actually in people's minds it means something tremendously different. When you say that word borrowing, it's actually transferring between our accounts internally. So without any comments, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico. Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long. Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. We're almost there. Under finance, we have another resolution. If we could get that title.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, accepting a grant from the Illinois Housing Development Authority Strong Communities Program.
Is there a motion on this one?
I'd make a motion.
Mr. Kirkstra, a second. Mr. Snipes. Basically, just quick explanation. There's hoops. Every time you get a grant, they're making us vote on something every month, it seems like. It's just this is part of the same grant we voted on last month, and there may be something else we got to do next month. So the question I have, I believe this allows me to sign other future things so it doesn't have to come back here. We've already agreed to the grant, and I think we structured the resolution in a manner that we won't have to keep coming back here for procedural stuff. I don't want to keep wasting time in the meeting on something that's just paperwork if it's not necessary. So I believe it left the window open. And if not, believe me, the next one will, because I had asked that. So we have a motion and a second. Might as well do a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker. Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long. Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Just as a FYI, this is somewhat connected to the land bank, or was our thought, we have 175,000 here. I've asked Dell and Ben and their teams to kind of look do we have any rural properties that cannot wait for the land bank to be formed? You know, places where the house is burned out and it's sitting in the middle of the neighborhood. I think we had one out in Quail a few years ago. That's a good example. That's rural. It's not in the municipality. If it can wait, we'll wait for the land bank. If it has to happen right away, then we may address that and we'll bring that back to PZA probably. So,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I have a couple properties in my district here that, when is he planning on the land bank being available for operation? Just take a guess. I mean, I'm not gonna hold you to it.
You know, it's hard to say right now. It's probably better determined here in about a month or so, but they do have to get their bylaws together. They do have to get an employee, whether it's full or part-time, because there has to be someone manage this process. And it has to have somebody that has some finance / real estate acumen involved. So I would say probably a couple of months at the very least, but they've got to go through bylaws. And then we've got all the new members who want to be part of that. So it's tough to say. I wish I could nail that down right now. We should know more about it.
I'm gonna hold you to it. I just didn't know if it was gonna be 2 years or a year or.
Oh no, I would say 6 months, no more. I mean, if it takes 6 months, we're not doing it right, so to speak.
Well, that money that's available now, what is that available for?
That it's for just what we're talking. It's residential. It's not commercial at all. It's all residential. So it would fit in for, well, the burned out house thing, acquiring that, either demoing it or getting it into the hands of a developer, but it's all project based.
Okay.
So, you know, we're kind of balancing timeliness versus really trying to use the land bank for these things.
Okay, so if I had a question, I would talk to you now?
Yeah, well, or you can get the addresses to Dell.
Okay,
It's probably the best thing to do is to start with that, let him identify where they're at. And that goes for anybody on the board in your districts if you're in a rural area, as it stands right now. But once the land bank is formed, then we'll look, you know, within your districts. And if Bradley were to join in Bourbonnais, you will have that available to you as well. They will get home rule powers for these types of situations. That's why it's so interesting to everybody. So,
okay, thank you.
Moving on. I guess I'll read the openings. Would you like to read the openings?
It makes no difference to me, sir. Your pleasure.
What does the board think? Who do they want to read the openings?
Do we want to have a roll call vote on it?
Yeah. Let's say Dan. I think they went for you.
3 openings on the Mantino 9 Drainage District, 3 openings on the Momence Pembroke Unit Drainage District number 1, 1 opening on the Raymond Drainage District, 1 opening on the Spring Creek Drainage District, 1 opening on the Union Drainage District number 2, 1 opening on the Yellowhead Washington Union Drainage District number 2, 7 openings on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission, 1 opening on the Essex Township Fire Protection District, 1 opening on the Kankakee Township Fire Protection District, 4 openings on the Blooms Grove Cemetery Association.
All righty, any old business? Mr. Snipes.
It's almost up on 2 items up on the, like, almost other business, but one is I want to probably inquire as to why the county board, if they so choose, to have like a deduction from whatever remunerations that they basically have in order to cover like your dental or whatever expenses or whatever in 2 payments or whatever. Can't just have it because we're moving to a paperless society. So when I have to look for a check, it's like the only time I ever write them is when I write them to the county to cover like dental and vision, and because everything else is online, checks are almost like obsolete. Why can't we just have like a little deduction? Is there something in stone? I know we used to do it, but somewhere along the line, I know we don't do it now. Is there something in stone that prohibits us from doing that? Or is it something that we can consider just doing, so that it's just, because either way, if I brought a check, you still, and you can just easily deduct it 1, 2, and it's gone. So I'm just wondering if that option.
Are you talking about a payroll deduction?
Just a payroll deduction for whatever that service is.
I had asked that before a long time ago, and I'll find out the answer, but it seemed to me that since county board members weren't employees of the county, and elected officials aren't technically employees of the county, they can't have a cafeteria plan which allows you to deduct and tax-free your premium. I should mention that the dental is 100% paid.
Right.
Paid. So there is no, obviously, there are no benefits for county board members. I want to clarify that, but it's 100% paid. But I think that's the answer, but let's find out, and someone will shoot you an email and let you know.
Okay, and then the second issue is I want to wish all the women a happy Women's Appreciation Month. Is the month of March is Women Appreciation, so I trust my other colleagues that are will probably echo the sentiments that want to say Happy Women Appreciation Month.
Alrighty, any other old business? New business? Anything before we go into executive session? Do we have a motion to go into executive session for legal settlement of claims, ILCS 120/2, C12? So all right, let's go with Ms. Parker, Mr. Payton. And it's a roll call to go in.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Will be just a minute. All right, we're back in session. Looks like all board members are still here. We have no other items on the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Hudson.
In honor of Women's Day, I'm going to go with Miss Hudson with the motion. And Miss Peters with a second.
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.